All right, gang, what do you think of that? Holy mackerel. Hey, have I got something to show you here? Oh, okay, that was the Bon Fry Overture, right? Bon Fry. Gene Shepard used to use that before his show and fade out with it too on WOR. He loved that particular music because, you know, Bon Fry, get out of the way, get the truck out of the way. The train is coming through. And he was the one that was going to come through all the garbage out there in life and deliver the truth. But if I got something crazy here for you that we used when we were teaching together, and some of you are going to have no idea what the heck this is all about. And some of you are going to get it. And those of you who get it are the true Gene Shepard fans who go beyond A Christmas Story and Leg Lamp, Trophy Wives and all that. Look at this. Look at this. This is a tie that we made. It's a tie. You know, you tie it around like this. And look at what it's got on the end there. It's got a snail. Now some of you are going to know what that's from. It's from one of his stories. And if you want to put that in the comments, you can do that. We'll see who gets it right. I might even be a nice guy and send you a free copy of my book or something. I don't know. At any rate, I want to get into Gene Shepard, who he was, how I got to know him, and how he told stories, because stories are the most potent form of human expression. And Gene learned that early on, and he wanted to become a great storyteller in the line of Mark Twain and so forth. So what you just saw in the opening is this right here. And let me make that a little bit larger if I can, so you can see that a little bit better there. I'll move myself over to the side. So inside Gene Shepard's story. So these are aspects of Gene Shepard that you really ought to know about. These, you know, so teaching with him, of course, I'm an academic. I'm a college professor and the like. I'll say more about that. But what is Gene Shepard really all about? What's his approach to storytelling? His approach to life, for that matter. And here you have it. If I had to summarize it in a little book, in fact, I was going to write an academic book, a university press book, as a PhD. Gene would say piled higher and deeper PhD. This is what I would cover. Number one, his storytelling was anti-nostalgic. Now that's going to throw some of you for a loop. What do you mean anti-nostalgic? It's all about nostalgia. People want to see A Christmas Story every year because of the nostalgia in it. No. What Gene meant by that was that he didn't want to make it look like he was just saying that a previous time was better than a current time. All times are the same. The human condition is the same. And so with all of his storytelling, he tried to get that across, and he took great offense if people would say to him it was just nostalgia. Second thing is that he always wanted to tell his stories in first person. Of course, he had a big ego, first person, he's into that. But he got that, originally he thought of that from Mark Twain. He said, you know, the great American tradition of storytelling and humorous storytelling is first person. So he wanted to be a first-person storyteller as well. Now, this led to all kinds of problems. You know, I get on the internet and I look around and I go to different places and I find out information supposedly about Gene Shepard, supposedly about A Christmas Story, and it's wrong. A lot of it is just plain wrong because you have to distinguish between Gene and Shep. Gene Shepard, and I always called him Gene. He called me Quinn. Gene is the real person, the Gene Shepard. Shep was a persona, a persona, a public personality that he created, which was different from the way he really was, except on rare occasion. For example, on his radio show, he would go back to himself, but that was very rare. It was persona. He was creating a personality as an actor, okay? And if you keep that in mind, then a lot of stuff makes sense. And you begin to see, too, why. With a movie like A Christmas Story, he wants to be the one who is the older Ralphie. He's not a narrator. He's the older Ralphie. And the older Ralphie, as a character, is commenting upon the life of the younger Ralphie. He's looking back on it, and he's giving us wisdom about life that he now has as being grown up, okay? And he does that through first person. But all of his storytelling really is first person. There are exceptions here and there, but not much. Third, his storytelling is parabolic. Now, when you look at A Christmas Story, for instance, the most popular of his stories, seen by 50 million people a year in movie form, unbelievable. You have to know that all of those different stories in there, the sub-stories that were put together, taken from different stories, and then a few were added by Bob Clark, the director, and Gene added along the way. But those stories are all parables. They're parables. They're stories that work on two levels. So on the one hand, there are stories that you see what you see, okay? And that's the way it is. So he's out in the snow, running through the snow, and that's kind of real life, okay? But what does that mean? What's the ritual involved? Okay, he was always looking for these other parabolic meanings. And the one that always gets me in trouble on this, I mean really gets me in trouble, is the fact that he liked to start all of his films with the smokestacks, the steel mill smokestacks in the background. And in fact, even with A Christmas Story, it starts out with those. You have to kind of look carefully. I've got a video on this channel where I talk about this and I show those. I think I even added some photos that I took when I was at the Christmas Story house, which is well worth your time, by the way, to go there. They do some great tours, a lot of good information. So at any rate, he wanted to start there because he's telling stories about being a male. And how shall I put this? Males have hormones, and males get those hormones going, and things go up. I'm being very careful here. This is rated, at least PG here. And so Gene would always say to me, Quinn, men get into trouble because of those hormones. And to some extent, all of my stories are about the troubles that males get into. And so that's what happens there. It's parabolic. It has two meanings. And so what I tried to do in my book, and you can kind of see a poster for it back here, you'll shoot your eye out, is look at the 20 of the 24 philosophies of life that he had that become the parables that animate all of his stories. Not all of those let's say philosophies of life in all those stories, but a lot of them. And I look at the 20 that are most important for A Christmas Story. All right. So parabolic. He's a parabolic storyteller. Where did he get that? He got that from, I'm going to switch over to a big screen here, if I can. He got that from George Ade. One of the biggest influences on his life was this newspaper columnist in Chicago by the name of George Ade, and Gene loved his work. And so Gene compiled some of his stories, his fables, if you will. In other words, parables. You think, when I say parable, people think of Jesus Christ told parables, earthly stories with heavenly meanings, they often say. So this is the way that George Ade looked at Chicago. He was critiquing Chicago people, different stereotypes in Chicago and the like. And so he did these parables in the form of fables and slang and so on. So Gene put this collection together. In fact, I'm going to say to you, one of the best things you could ever read to help you understand all of his work, including A Christmas Story, one of the best things by far is the introduction in this book. Because this was early on, this was in the 60s, and he really gets into what he's all about back then. And this really stayed with him his whole life. He says, some writers weep over the plight of man while others laugh. Many more ignore it altogether and become wealthy. It takes a particularly wide perspective and more than the usual amount of love of humankind to be able to laugh. Okay, that's from early Jean Shepherd, laughter. Okay, so let's look at the next one down is one that throws people really badly. Expressionistic humorist. He's expressionistic. He picked up early on the idea that his stories should reveal what's going on inside of people, inside of them. So in expressionism, you distort the external, what you see outside the people, in order to get at the real feelings of what's going on the inside. So when Ralphie is there at the kitchen table with that rifle and he's pretending to be shooting Black Bart and all, you know, oh, help protect us. The family's under the table and he's shooting. That didn't really happen. But when Ralphie was doing this daydreaming about his desire for this rifle, his real feelings about it were coming out because he would have those kinds of daydreams. So you can think of expressionism like a kind of daydreaming. And some of the daydreaming scenes that were written in the original script for A Christmas Story were taken out. My favorite, by the way, is in his movie for TV called The Star-Crossed Romance of Josephine Kosnowski. And in that, the high school age Ralphie realizes that he's getting attached to this girl, and the family, Polish family, thinks he's going to have to marry her. And this scares the daylights out of him. He doesn't want to get married. He's been warned against it. So he's going to take off. And he goes running out of this, the basement of a church. And he's heading out of there. But his girlfriend's two brothers, both of whom were on the football team at Notre Dame, decide they're going to get this guy. They're going to get this Ralphie. And they go running through the streets after him. And then as they shoot this from WGBH Boston, did a great job making this. There is a scene in there where suddenly you see the entire Notre Dame football team chasing Ralph as he's bailing out on this girl that the family wants him to get married to, see? And the whole Notre Dame team was not chasing him, only those two. But to get at the expressionism, they put in there the whole team, okay, chasing him. Expressionism, to distort the exterior to get at the real interior feelings. And then I put next to that humorist. So he's doing this with humor, not comedy. In fact, Jean in general did not like the word comedy because it meant one-liners. It meant people who used bad language. People didn't respect other people. It meant stupid laughs, stupid things that people were writing. He didn't have much respect for a lot of comedians. And he saw himself in the history of Mark Twain and George Ade and so forth as a humorist. And he said to me one time, he said, look at Quinn, what a humorist does is make it fun and enjoyable to watch because of the story. It's the whole story and what the characters get embroiled in. It's not one-liners designed to make you laugh. That's comedy. So he considered himself a humorist. And finally, he was a raconteur with an attitude. And I mean an attitude. Boy, he was difficult to get along with. I should say that a lot of people in show business and artists who are well known that I've known have had the same thing. There's an ego there. There's a great pride in their work. And when anyone seems to be critical of their work, disrespectful of them and their work, they can turn on you. And Jean would turn on me on numerous occasions when I'd say, why'd you do it this way and not this way and so forth. So he had an attitude about him. And anybody who got to know him personally saw that kind of nastiness come out, and it broke a lot of his friendships. And people couldn't deal with it. And so I guess I was patient or something with it, and I let him do his thing with me. Although one time he really got me. We did a preview of A Christmas Story in a theater, And I came out before we previewed it, and I introduced him. And I admit it was a bit wordy. And so then I go and I sit down, and he comes out to all the great applause, and he comes out and he says something like this. I wish I had the tape or the exact words, but he said, "You just saw why all professors are mini Hitlers." That's what he said about me. Oh boy. Of course, I just let it go. So here you have the 5 things that I most wanted to tell you about Gene that I hope will really help you understand him. I want to go over a couple of other things with you just real quickly here. First of all, you wonder who the heck I am and why am I doing this? I'm a speaker. I go around speaking about different things, mostly about communication. That was my field. I was a professor, retired now, a professor emeritus, as they call it, of communication, an author. I've written many books about communication, including the book about A Christmas Story. I was originally going to write a book about Gene Shepherd's approach to humor. And it was going to be very academic, steeped in all the theory of humor and so on. And friends told me, don't write that book. Nobody's going to read it and all. And so I put it off and never went back, looked at my notes much after Gene passed away. And then a couple of years ago, I was talking to some friends, and they were asking me about A Christmas Story. And I explained a few things to them, like the leg lamp is a trophy wife and other things. And they said, you got to write this up. You got to write this up. So I sat down and I wrote it up. And I'm glad I did, because I can actually sell some copies of this book, whereas the typical academic book sells about 15 copies. I'm a mentor. I mentor people in show business, former students who work in the media, and other friends. And I do work with CEOs and the like who are public speakers and need help with public speaking, especially the storytelling end of it. And that's a lot of fun, mentoring. And then I'm also a source for media. So media will call me up and ask me about different things that have to do with media or things I've written books on. And then if you look me up online, you'll find all kinds of things. One that I might recommend to you real quickly, and then we'll move on, is I did a podcast with Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy. And I think I got a picture of it here. Yeah. So there I am with Mike at his studio in Santa Monica. And I put on the bottom there the title of it, because if you just look under my name and Mike Rowe, you'll probably get the audio. They decided with the video version to call it the title that I have down there. So if you look under that title, or you just do Mike Rowe, Quentin Schultz, and Playboy, you'll get that. And Mike Rowe did a great interview with me about it. I didn't know that he learned storytelling from Gene Shepherd too. And in fact, you can't see it here, but behind me to the left is a mini leg lamp that he leaves on that show. And you can see it depending on the angle of the cameras. So we had a great conversation about Gene Shepherd, about storytelling, and the like. And so finally, let me just say that I hope you'll buy a copy of this book, and I'll be happy to sign it for you, believe it or not. And that is the address that you would use to go and order a copy. Or you can send me an email at an email address I'm going to give you shortly, that you can contact me with any other questions or anything you have. Maybe some things you don't want to post here tonight on the live feed, but you want to fire me an email. And that email is just you'll shoot your eye out at gmail.com. You'll shoot your eye out. And there's no apostrophe in there for that. Okay. So I'd be happy to sign a book for your friends or whatever. The reviews of the book are really, really strong, and I'm so delighted to hear about all of that. I'm really appreciative. So there you go. There's some of my big promotion. Now let's get on from here and look at a few of the comments here. Okay, the email reference is from the story about Florida being overrun by snails. Nope, that's not it. This is, I hate to give it away, but it's a story about a noose. The tie is a noose around the neck. Okay, that's getting close to giving it away. Trouble with hormones department. Yes, that's Gene Shepherd was all about the trouble with hormones. He had a view of male and female. It was completely reverse, the opposite of what most people have. So if you look at A Christmas Story, the movie, for example, what you find is that the old man is not too bright. He does stupid things. Let's put it that way. Okay. And also he's strangely romantic, but he's romantic toward things, toward the car. He's in love with the car, and he gets the leg lamp and he falls in love with the leg lamp, which, as Gene said to me, becomes a trophy wife. He wants to get that leg lamp in the window so that he can turn on the neighborhood. And he goes out there, and Bob Clark, who's playing Swede out there, the director, the two of them, Gene is trying to get that thing placed just right. And he's so proud, and his hips are moving a little bit. He's all excited, you see, about this. So Gene believed that men get excited about things and women get excited about relationships. And men are not good at relationships. In fact, I'm going to read a quote from Gene about his own trouble with relationships, which is really, really something else here. I don't know if I can read it with these glasses or not. These are my computer glasses. I'm going to go to my reading glasses here, see if this works a little better to read this. He says here, perhaps since my livelihood centers around that redoubtable phase of human activity, communication with our fellows, I am a bit oversensitive in that area. Boy, that's an understatement. He had real relational problems, and he believed that men do. He was married 4 times. His last wife, Lee Brown, was really one that helped take care of him and protect him and all from getting himself into more trouble. He believed that women are rational and they solve the problems that men get into and get the family into. So the mom in his stories is always the hero who's getting the males out of trouble, whether it's the male kids or the male husband, father. All right. So he had reversed views on the stereotypes, and that comes through in all of his stories. Okay. I am the blind date. I am. You got it. Oh, the blind date. To go on a blind date and to realize that you are the blind date. Okay. And so Gene felt that, guys think they're great romantics and they will woo women and everything out. And then they make fools of themselves. And they're going home from a disaster date and they're riding the streetcar. Of course, that's related to the streetcar named Desire, Tennessee Williams. And they realize that they're the blind date and there's a noose around their neck. They're in deep trouble. Excellent, excellent. I have the book. George Ade loved to use capital letters in sentences, as did Gene Shepherd. It's a great book. Hey, thanks for posting that. It is a great book. It's a great book. And that introduction that Gene wrote in there is one of the best things he wrote. Thanks for saying that. And I'm glad you were able to get a copy. I don't know. I bought mine in the 60s. In fact, I was looking at it. Look at what this thing cost. Look at that. $1.35. Try to buy a book for that now. And of course, mine is all marked up from teaching with Gene and asking him this thing or that thing about it. The various things. The other thing I'd recommend, by the way, by way of background on Gene that shaped all of his work was the early movie that he did for public television, The Phantom of the Open Hearth. The Phantom of the Open Hearth. Now, this book is not just a script. It's the script, but it's also got photos from the movie. And then I'm recommending it in particular because of the introduction that Gene wrote. You see, early in his life, when Gene was writing a few things about his work, he honestly talked about his work and how he did it. And then once he started to gain some traction and become fairly successful, he didn't want to do that. He was afraid that if people understood how he did what he did, they would no longer respect him for it. And so he became very hidden about stuff, especially about the parables and the meanings of the stories. And the whole rifle bit, for example, desiring that rifle was based on Gene's view that men fall in love with things, and that during the Cold War, male government leaders were falling in love with atomic weapons, and they were potentially going to use these things. So he originally wrote that story about the Red Ryder BB gun as an anti-war, anti-weapon, really, story. You can read about that in my book. So this is the other one that I'd recommend. Again, I don't know. It may be out there used now if you can get a copy. But then Gene shut down. Now, in about either the very late 70s or the very early 80s, I was a new professor of communication. And I had been listening to Gene on the radio. I'm a ham radio operator like he was. And I'd been listening to him on the radio on WOR New York at night on a medium wave band, especially in the winter when the conditions were better, and taking notes about things and so on. And then so I became a communication professor, and I knew that storytelling was the most potent form of human expression. And that this guy seemed to me to be absolutely the best storyteller out there that I could find. I mean, I think he was certainly one of the top 5 storytellers in the 20th century in the U.S., maybe in the top 3, and I would put Mark Twain as number 1. Twain died in 1910, so he's not really the same era. But in any case, I thought, I've got to learn how to do storytelling, because that's going to be a big part of my teaching, my speaking. You've got to learn how to tell stories to be successful in many ways as a communicator in different life and careers and so on. So I looked at Gene's call sign up in the Federal Communications Commission directory, and I got his home address. I don't know if it was his house in Florida back then, or if it was his cottage up in Maine, or a P.O. box that he had in New Jersey for a while. I don't know what address it was, but at any rate, I sent him a note and I said, I'm a new communication professor. I'd like to learn storytelling. I think you're the best. Could I learn from you? I didn't expect to hear anything. And then suddenly a letter comes, typed letter. Lee Brown, his wife, would type letters for him. And not to say that he couldn't type, but she did the transcription for him on the scripts and everything too. So he sends this note back saying that he was astonished that a real professor, a PhD, piled higher and deeper, would take an interest in his work, which, low ego here, merits serious scholarly investigation. See, okay, you get it. So I thought, okay, this is going to be fun. So he said, what do you want to do? And I wrote him back and I said, well, I can go to some of your performances and all, but I'd really like to be able to talk with you about how you do what you do. And the best way to do that, in my point of view, is to teach it. If you teach with someone who does something really well, you can learn the best. And in fact, I learned more about communication by teaching it, having to explain it to other people so that they could get it, than by anything else. So we decided to do a course together on his work. And as far as I know, I was the only person in the United States ever to do a complete course multiple times just on his work, on the movie A Christmas Story, on his other stories, and so on. And so we would get together and he would basically hold court. Somebody asked me online earlier today what it was like being with Shepard in a classroom setting. Well, Gene was very disorganized except for knowing how to tell a story. So he would answer questions by telling stories about his life or about the story of making a movie or whatever. And he would generally do that by sitting on the desk in the front of the room. Okay. He would not do it like he was doing his performances, walking around and acting it out or whatever. And so that's kind of how it went. Now, in terms of structuring a course, organizing it, once I started to work with him and I realized how he was doing what he was doing, then I could structure the courses so that we would cover in order both his life and what he learned about storytelling along the way, and which stories exemplified things that he learned about how you do storytelling and how you do humor. What does it really mean to be a humorist? All right. So in the back of my book, I don't have a copy of it right here, but in the back of my book that you see there, I have an appendix where I go through the steps that Gene essentially went through to create a story. And he would start with anything that he observed that was interesting. So if I'm looking at this microphone right here, and he might be looking at that microphone, and that triggers something about microphones and the history of microphones and the times that he used microphones, and when he used microphone when he was a ham radio operator and so on. And pretty soon he's got a story going about, let's say, some guy who was a host of a late night radio show, and let's take Chicago as an example, and he accidentally left the mic on during the commercials, and he was not such a good guy, and he started saying things he shouldn't have said and so on. Now we're off to the races. We got a great story going on here about that and what happens. Okay, so at any rate, get a copy of the book and read that. I've thought about writing a book just on, as I told you before, just on his method of storytelling, but I just don't think there's enough people that would read it, and I'm in my 70s, and I'd tell you, it's a trip going through all the notes that I have from teaching with him and other stuff. One of the things I did along the way, Gene loved cars because, again, he said men love things. And one of the things that men in his generation especially most loved above other things was automobiles, exotic automobiles, automobiles from Europe, let's say. He liked Volkswagens. He liked other cars. He had an opportunity to own he claimed part of a VW dealership in Cincinnati, and did not do that. But in any case, cars were a big topic of his. And so at one point I said, you know what I'm going to do? I am going to do a book on Gene Shepherd's view of automobiles. Okay, only a professor would think of such a stupid thing that anyone would be interested in reading a book on Gene Shepherd's views of automobiles, like the Olds, right? The touring Olds in A Christmas Story. What a great deal that car is. That sucker would freeze up in the middle of the summer in the equator. Because that's the other thing. The things that men fall in love with invariably break down, and they don't work. Now, I got to be careful what I say about that and his view of his wife and all that. But in any case, so that's that. And then there's the furnace. Clunker! The furnace is a problem. And so he's going down there, as Gene once said to me, the old man goes down to the 5th level of Dante's Inferno to meet the devil, which is the furnace, head to head. And the devil is going to win. The furnace will never be cured of those clinkers. Oh, boy. Funny stuff. So I collected all this stuff. I mean, everything, all the columns from Car and Driver that he wrote, and I never did anything with it. And then one time I was talking to Jerry Seinfeld. And of course, Seinfeld is a big car nut. Well, it also turns out that Jerry Seinfeld says that he learned his entire comedic sensibility from Gene Shepherd. Well, that was interesting. And when I told Jerry that I knew Gene and taught with Gene, he was flabbergasted. But at any rate, a couple years after that, I thought to myself, I'm never going to use this car stuff of Gene's. And this is the stuff that Jerry grew up with. He always read Gene's column in Car and Driver and all. And so I packaged all this stuff up and sent it off to Jerry Seinfeld. I said, maybe you'll do a book on Gene Shepherd and cars, but I can't do it. It's beyond me. He sent a nice note back to me, but that. And then I've got another idea for a book over here, which is made up of quotes from Gene's radio programs. When I used to listen to Gene, I would write down quotes because Gene was this kind of philosopher. So I would write down these quotes. Let's see. Here's one. We all feel like we have no voice. we feel that no one can hear us, that we have no communication. And it's an interesting quote. Here's one that touches on religion. I once said to Gene, I said, Gene, you know, you really are a Calvinist humorist, a Calvinist humorist. Now, a Calvinist is someone who has a low view of human nature. And Gene had a very low view of human nature, I'll tell you. He should have had a little bit lower view of himself, but that's a different story. So here's a quote from one of his radio shows in 65. The world of salvation in our time, the word of salvation in our time is discount, like a sale, a discount. That means you're in with God. You don't pay list price. Can you imagine some poor guy getting excommunicated from EJ Corvettes? Now, that was an old department store. From now on, he's got to pay that list price. Oh, boy. The theology in that, the philosophy in that, the humor in that. That was Gene. Let's go to a few more comments, see who else we have here that's coming in. Okay, what do we got here? Hey there, hello. Thanks for coming in. Here's one. What were the errors in the New York Times obit? Oh, okay. So, well, anywhere you look out there for material about Gene's life, it's going to be peppered with errors because, well, for two reasons. One is people they hear something from someone else supposedly about Gene, and then they pass it along. And in the world of social media, this stuff gets out there, and all kinds of stuff is out there about Gene that's just plain wrong. And part of it is this difference between Gene and Shep. So on the Facebook group, I'm a fan of Gene Shepherd. I occasionally post things in there, and I'll use Gene rather than Shep. And when I initially started doing that, people were getting angry with me because I wasn't saying Shep. Well, I distinguish between Gene and Shep. If you want to talk about Shep, the persona, we can talk about Shep. If you want to talk about the real person, let's talk about Gene. And so I got a call the other day from, was it a newspaper or magazine? I can't remember. At any rate, they wanted to interview me about Gene. And so I'll say Gene rather than Shep. And I was saying some things this guy didn't like, which I knew to be true. So what he does is pull up the obituary in the New York Times for Gene's death, and he starts reading it to me. And I said, do you believe all that stuff? He said, do I believe it? It's in the New York Times. Now, this is fantastic. Gene would have a field day with that. He would do a whole show on this clown that called him up and read an obituary of a famous person in the New York Times and believed what it said. Because Gene, as I say in my book, did not believe the media. He was as big a skeptic as the media, and especially media personalities. He would tell me about people that he served on committees, the guilds, the Hollywood guilds with, as a screenwriter and all. And he would say, this guy's a jerk, and this woman's, I won't even go into it. And, he said, there's this big gap between the way things really are and the way people think they are. So at any rate, this guy pulls this New York Times obit on me. And he said, so you don't believe that, huh? I said, how many wives did it say that Gene had? He said, it says right here, 3 wives. I said, okay. And that was somewhere near the beginning, I think, of what he read to me. I said, that's wrong. He had 4. And then he said another thing, and it was wrong. I don't even remember what the other thing was, but I mean, it was, oh gosh. Gene promoted that in part because he would lie to reporters, and sometimes he would do it intentionally so that he could then laugh about the stupid thing that the reporter said in the article about him. All right? So now you get some sense of what I'm talking about here. You can ask me questions about Gene, of course. Let's see what you got here. Thanks for the live stream. You're welcome. I thought I would do this. I get a lot of questions on email and so on. How old were you when you first discovered Gene Shepherd? Late 60s, I guess, listening to him on the radio in Chicago, as a Chicagoan. Did you first become aware of him via his radio show, or was it a book or film? Definitely via the radio show, although I quickly started researching him the best I could. And I remember when did this come out? Phantom of the Open Hearth, this first movie. Trying to look at the date on this. This was late 1976. If that's accurate, when it came out. And I remember watching that and really being proud of Fred Barzyk, the producer, in terms of how he put together the different parts of the story. You see, when you do these films about Gene's work, what Gene does is put together different parts of different stories with one overarching story. Like, let's say, The Rifle in A Christmas Story is the overarching story, but there are all these sub-stories, you know. How do you get a kid to eat? You know, Randy, how do the piggies go? You know, so you get the sub-stories. But so Gene would put these together in a script, and then it was up to the director to try to make it all happen as a single story. And Gene would say his films are not his other stories just put together, that the films are separate. They are stories in and of themselves. Same thing about his books. I don't have any right here to show you, but his In God We Trust and All Others Pay Cash, for example, it includes a lot of the stories that he published in Playboy magazine, but he puts them together in a certain order with certain themes and sometimes material between them that makes it a whole. So he would call it a novel, because life today, he would say to me, is episodic. And so then this is an episodic novel. So that's exactly when I came across him must have been in the 60s on radio. I hope that helps. Let's see. I love this. That course had to be amazing. Oh, yeah, the course, amazing. There was a local newspaper reporter who was a Gene Shepherd fan, and I knew him. He was the entertainment writer here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I said to him, do you want to come in for one class? You just have to sit in the back, don't cause any trouble or whatever. He was known as kind of a troublemaker to himself, this reporter. And so I let him come in and sit in the back. And it was a large class. I bet there were 60 students or so in the class, kind of an auditorium style, raked down toward a little stage. And he wrote 3 stories about that. I mean, it was really amazing. In fact, at the college I was teaching at, where I did this, he said it was the best thing that ever happened in the history of the college, from him being in there to see that. But again, I will tell you that sometimes a student would ask a question, or I would ask a question, and Gene would get perturbed. And he would give a flippant answer, or even be critical. So it was wild, but I learned a lot from him that didn't have anything to do with the course, just from conversations with him. I often wondered why he was open with me about so many things in terms of how he did his work. And I wondered about that over the years. The last I communicated with him was 2 years, I think, before he died, and 1 year before his wife died, if I recall right. And he sent me a letter, typical typed letter, and he said, let's do the class. I'll come up. And I've been trying to find that letter, by the way. It was on WGBH stationery or something. And he said to me, by the way, I'm working on a new story, and you're going to be in it. And I said, really? I'm going to be in the story? He said, yeah, it's going to be Kwesi Quentin's used car dealership or used cars or junk cars or something like that. I said, Gene, it doesn't have anything to do with me. Of course, here we go back to persona versus real person. He said, listen, all of you professors are the same. All you do is take age-old wisdom and age-old theories and philosophy and all, and you recycle it as something new by using new language for it. That's all you do. So if you know ancient wisdom, you don't need any of the new stuff. He said, you guys are just recyclers, like cars. We're selling used cars, used ideas. That's the way Gene operated. See, he's got that deeper meaning going on. So yeah, it was a trip, all right. Let's see. Let's go to another comment. Did Gene prepare much? I assume you mean for the classes, but I'll broaden that out a little bit. Gene did no preparation for classes. I couldn't get him to do any preparation. He was not that organized. And so the first time I taught a course on his work, I brought in one of my colleagues because I was new at the college, and I thought, boy, with Gene coming into town, this could be a problem because he was notoriously difficult to get along with. And I didn't know what he was going to tell the students or what the language would be like that he would use and so on. Would he offend people with his views of male versus female? You can imagine all this. Okay, so this is back in the early 80s. And so I had a colleague come in with me and help me. And we really put together, along with Gene that first time, a really good organized course. Boy, I wish I had the syllabus for that. That was in the days of mimeographs. You know, you'd make mimeograph copies of things and all. Oh, man. But so we provided structure and questions. We always would have about, my colleague never then, I don't think he taught it again with me. It was just me and or Gene and, or Gene and I. And then I would have questions for each class based on the readings or the viewings for recordings that were assigned for that class. And then the students would have to come up with more questions. And then we would have discussion with Gene. If the questions were not good and Gene didn't like them, we would forget the questions. And he would just go on, and I'm madly taking notes. Can you imagine if I recorded all that stuff? And I never did. I never took photos. I mean, back then, you didn't have a cell phone. Think about taking photos all the time. One of my colleagues took a couple of photos of Gene just outside the building we were teaching in. And I think I ended up with I found in my notes, my voluminous boxes of notes, the negatives. And I sent the negatives to my friend Steve, who's a very good biographer of Gene Shepherd. I said, maybe you can use these, because I didn't know what to do with those are the only photos I had. Now there were photos in the paper and probably other media as well. But well, actually, yeah, we did a performance there, co-sponsored with the local public television station. And the TV station promoted it because Gene had a series on at the time. What was the name of that series? Was it Gene Shepherd's America? I think it was Gene Shepherd's America. And so I got them to co-sponsor with us. And we recorded that. Now, a friend of mine did the recording of Gene's performance that night, about an hour and 45 minutes. And, you know, in fact, he was one of the greatest collectors of old time radio shows, lived in Chicago. He passed away a few years ago. And I wanted to get a copy of that from him, and I never did. I let it go, you know how life goes. And then I got a note from him one day saying that he was in his Arkansas home, and in the winter, his home with hundreds of thousands of audio recordings of all kinds of video and audio and all, heavily Gene Shepherd stuff. He tried to get recording of every Gene Shepherd radio show there ever was. The heat went out in the house, and the pipes broke, and the water went all over. And by the time he got home later and found out about it, everything was filled with mold and mildew, and he was required to throw everything out. Terrible story, but true. Let's see. Here, during your course, was there good rapport and chemistry between Gene and your students? Reasonably good. Yeah, if Gene felt that he wasn't being criticized, it was good, but he also held back. He hid things, which ticked me off. Things that I knew, for example, about the meaning of a particular story and why he did it the way he did it. I knew that from my conversation with him, but he wouldn't open up with the students about that. That kind of irritated me a little bit. I wouldn't say he lied, but he just closed down, is the way to put it. Looks like there's a documentary called Shep that's been in development for a few years, more than a few years, I think a couple of decades. Anything that I can share about the film's progress, hopefully it'll be released someday. Yeah, that's Nick Mantis is making that down in Indiana, in the Hammond area where Gene grew up. And I saw Nick down there when I spoke at the Hammond Historical Society. When was that? In the spring, I think maybe March or so. And he's coming along well with it. Slow process. He got started on it and trying to do it a particular way, which would include listening to all of Gene's audio recordings and watching all of his shows and reading all the material. That's almost impossible. And then trying to pick out stuff to use. And then he got in the idea of doing it as a series, maybe like a TV series. And that's, of course, a lot of work. So I think he's moving along well now with something like a 90-minute documentary. He interviewed me here in town, boy, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, long time ago. And I gave him some material in my experiences with Gene. So I'm hoping it's going to come out. Nick is a very good cinematographer. He's good on audio, good on editing, so it should be good. Let's see. I met him once briefly at a book signing. I wonder now how he felt about us, the fans. He was funny and charming to me, but what did he really think of us? Well, look, when it came to interacting with fans, Gene was very accommodating because they were feeding his ego. It was soul food for Gene to have fans around. And at some of his concerts afterwards, he would take people out for coffee and tell stories and all. That's the way he was typically with fans, because they were saying all positive things and they looked up to him. And as I said earlier, he had low self-esteem. And so he was that way. And he was typically that way with me too, until we would get into some disagreement about something, usually because he took it as a slight, and then there was trouble. Now, he does have some things out there that you can look up under, what he thought about radio. After he left radio, he was very critical of radio as a medium, and he said negative things about his fans in radio. But that's the way Gene was. When Gene would move up the what he would call the business and show business. In other words, he called it the business. He was in the business. When he would go up to the next step, he would then look back at the previous one and talk down on the people and the institutions involved in that. That's just the way he was. And he wanted to get up to movies, feature movies. That's where the money was. That's where the recognition was. And he finally made it there. Made a few of the films. I thought his public TV programs were quite good. I don't know that he respected the people who worked on those and made those with him as much as he should have. That would be my negative comment there, that he took credit, and a lot of what happened in his success was because of the people around him, behind him, helping him, calming him down, and so on. On A Christmas Story, Bob Clark eventually had it up to here with him and barred him from the set. And I understand that, the reason for that. So, because Gene was going to the performers and telling them how to deliver their lines and all, because Gene wanted them to be done exactly his way. He knew the story, he knew the parable, the meaning, and he was going to pull that. And you can't, a writer can't do that and have a director who's going to put together a coherent thing. I mean, Bob Clark loved Gene's work and stories, and he did a marvelous job. In fact, the budget that Bob Clark had for that film, A Christmas Story, was not enough really to cover the film. So Bob even put a lot of his own money into it to make it happen. Let's see. I'm loving the talk. So did Gene ever talk with you about spending time with the Beatles in '64 or about meeting John Lennon after the breakup of the band? Boy, I would like to say that I knew much about that. But, you know, I don't have any recollection of that. But listen, Gene died in '99, and my last communication with him, it was maybe '96 or so. And my memory could be bad on some things, or he could have told me things that were not true. My recollection about all of that was that Gene made friends with Shel Silverstein, you know, who writes children's books and writes music and all. And Shel was doing some writing, poetry, I think mostly for Playboy magazine. And Playboy, as Gene told me the story, Playboy didn't particularly want things written by Gene. And so Shelley took it upon himself to convince Hugh Hefner and others at Playboy to give Gene a chance. So Gene moved into the Playboy mansion with Shel Silverstein, and Shelley worked with him for a while on how to convert his oral stories, the ones he would use on stage or on radio and so on, into written stories. That's what Shel Silverstein worked on Gene, helped him on that. Now, Gene was a very smart guy with a terrific vocabulary and everything, and understood story. But here's the thing. I didn't say this before. One of the reasons that I most got interested into working with Gene and learning storytelling from him is he was the only person I could find that had figured out how to take the same basic story and adapt it to, get this, every medium. Every medium. He could do it in written form in magazine, written form in books that became novels. He could do it on radio, that is audio. He did it on recordings, LP, long playing recordings, you know, with his stand-up work and so forth at the Limelight. He did it in television, in a couple different formats in television. And of course, he did it on stage, including one Broadway production. Boy, was he good on stage, phenomenal. And of course, in feature films as well as made-for-TV movies. When you look at the scope of somebody taking stories and transferring them and maintaining the basic theme of the story across all of those, it's unheard of. You all know this. Somebody will say to you, boy, I just saw this movie and man, I don't like it. It's not nearly as good as the book. Okay, so we compare that way. Well, Gene's goal was to make sure that his stories were just as good, no matter which of the media he was performing in. And that really got me, because at the time I was thinking of writing a book on how do you do that. And I looked at the literature that was out there, the academic articles, the peer-reviewed articles and other books and all. And the only thing that was really out there was how to take a novel and convert it into a screenplay for a feature movie. And most of what was written about that would not work. So and the fact that Gene was doing that, to me, said, this is a very, very special guy with special gifts. And I think he should go down in the Hall of Fame with 20th century American humorists because of his ability to do that, if nothing else. I don't see any other comments down below. I'm going to try one other thing if I can get this to work here quickly. I'm going to There we go. Okay, I'm putting an email down that if you want, you can send me any questions privately to that email. And right now I'm going to look at that email too and see if there are any in there that I should answer. I won't give your name out and all. I do this a lot. I speak around the country at different universities and colleges and professional associations and all. I was in California recently to speak to a group of attorneys and mediators. Very interesting to talk with them, and I learned a lot from them. And one of the things I like to do in those situations is to give them at the beginning my cell phone number. See, if you have questions you don't want to ask in front of the group, here's my cell phone number. You don't have to give me your name, just fire the questions off, because anonymously people will sometimes ask questions that they won't in some other way. So let's see if we've got anything here coming in that we should look at. I'm having trouble with operating this. I don't have an engineer. I tried to talk my my grandson into coming over tonight and engineering this for me. I got so many things going on at once here. It's crazy. So I don't see any emails there. Let's go back to comments. Let's see. Okay, here's one. Since writing your book, has anyone from the film reached out to you to reminisce about Gene or the making of the film, the story, the lessons, etc.? For example, that is Peter Billingsley or others. The answer to that is probably no. I did get a legal threat, but that was to be expected. When you get into the Hollywood business, I had someone call me that thought that I was infringing in on some properties. I won't say anything more about that. But everything I wrote in the book and all the illustrations that I paid to have drawn, the line drawings for my book, everything, I ran through a very pricey intellectual property attorneys. Because I knew that especially Warner Brothers is highly litigious and you have to be careful. So I did connect with Yano, who plays Grover Dill, and we've become friends. Great guy, great guy. I hope to see him in a few weeks in Atlanta when I have to head south to do some speaking. And we've talked about some things, and he did a video interview with me that's on the A Christmas Story family website. I believe that's where it is. Put in Yano, Y-A-N-O, and then Quentin Schultz video. You probably will find it somewhere. I sent requests for endorsements of the book to quite a few of the people in the movie, the celebrity stars, whatever, actors, whatever you want to call them. And I think Yano is the only person that responded positively to that. And I thought Jerry Seinfeld was going to write the introduction for the book based on our conversation. But then some things happened in his life that I don't want to go into, which made it a very inopportune time, and I had to get the book out to the publisher. So unfortunately, that didn't go. But maybe we'll do something later, a second edition of the book, where maybe he'll write something for it. Hearing him talk about how Gene Shepherd influenced him is very interesting. In fact, I've done universities lectures just on that topic by showing clips of Jerry Seinfeld's stand-up comedy and Gene Shepherd's stand-up comedy and comparing how they do what they do. And that is quite remarkable. What Jerry picked up most, I think, from Gene was that Gene learned how to take everyday things and find the humor in them. And that became the gist, in my view, of Jerry Seinfeld's TV series, Seinfeld. It's not a show about nothing. It's a show about everything in life, all the stuff that you don't normally put into dramas because it seems to lack drama. Okay. Maybe somebody will see this from the film or whatever. I just did an interview last night with somebody who has a bit part in the movie. I don't want to give it away, but it's a really, really good bit part. And I'm going to post that on this channel within the next few days. I got to do a little quick editing on it, and then I'll put it up. And I met him through a friend of a friend. But, you know, it is interesting to me that people who were real involved with the movie, at least the performers, have not reached out to me at all. They seem to have no interest in how Gene thought about his work and why he wrote it the way he did and so on. Maybe I'm wrong. I have had some communication with the art director who, among other things, designed the leg lamp. And that's really good. And he is a genius. The art direction of A Christmas Story is worth an Academy Award, if you ask me. The whole thing. I mean, it is so set to period, about 1939, in so many ways. And yet, it includes things that will throw you off because they're not quite right for 1939. And Gene insisted on that because he wanted people to see A Christmas Story as a universal film about human nature, not just as a nostalgic movie about 1939. I hope that makes sense to you, but that helps clears up some of the confusion of why things seem to somewhat out of place. What are some lessons that have most impacted you in your journey with Gene? Did any lessons come to light revisiting all your notes all these years later? You know what? I have not been able to get through all the notes. I have so much stuff of all different kinds, and it includes not just notes I took and stuff that we used in classes, but it also includes the notes that I made in his various books when we were discussing parts of the stories in the book, where I would underline a phrase or whatever and says, it means this and all of that. So I don't have any of my books that he wrote right here, but you can kind of see this is what I would do with his books and all. And so I've got all of that material. And then I've got files of articles that he was interviewed in. I made a collection of all that stuff starting years ago when you couldn't get any of it online. You had to go to the periodical guide to literature and then look it up year by year. And then you had to contact a library that had a copy of that, and you had to pay them to send you a copy of the article. So I collected all of that stuff too. Although I might have given that to some of that stuff to my buddy who's the biographer as well. About impacted me, first of all, Gene convinced me what I suspected all along, and that was that if you're a really good storyteller, you can have an impact on people's lives. Now, for good or for bad, some of the worst propagandists are great storytellers. But storyteller is the key. Propositions, statements are not. But it's stories that seduce us in to what's happening, to the characters, to the plot line, and they produce anticipation. Gene used to say to me that stories work in three ways. They provide us with retrospection so that we can look back on, let's say, our lives and what happened and learn from that. They provide us with introspection so that in our life now, we can think about what's going on, the stories of our lives, and we can learn from that and we can change. And then he would say stories provide us with a way to do projection so that we can imagine the way we would like things to be in our life or in our work or whatever, and we can work toward that. So he thought that stories functioned in those three ways. And when you think about that, that is really, really powerful and true. And it's made me a big fan of journaling and the importance of memoir, personal memoir, even if you don't share it with other people. And so that's helped. Can I provide a list of the books I mentioned tonight and a line about what's relevant about each? Yeah, I'll do that. This will get posted, and then I underneath it, I can put a few links of things that I've mentioned, including to the books. But real quickly, again, The America of George Ade, The American of George Ade. And then if you can find it, The Phantom of the Open Heart is good for the introduction. In terms of his best books, which are collections, In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash is his best, followed by Wanda Hickey's Night of Golden Memories and Other Disasters. And then I would put The Ferrari in the Bedroom. Now, The Ferrari in the Bedroom is a slightly different kind of thing in that it also includes some essay material, such as him driving presumably from New York or New Jersey, where he's living, up to his cottage up in Maine. So, and there are some other books in there too, and lots of other articles and all. But at any rate, you all have been great to stick along with me tonight on this. And I will get this posted so you can review it if you'd like. I would like to get one or two quick comments from some of you, just by making a note in the comments or whatever about the quality of the audio and the video. And if you would help me with that, because I'm listening to myself, but I can't tell what it looks like to you or sounds like to you. So how is the audio and video? Anyone want to say anything about that? Nobody wants to. I'm just checking here to see if I'm getting any email coming in. No more email. The video and audio has been consistently good. Hey, thanks for that. I work hard. I got a fair amount of technology here. I do wish I had an engineer helping me, but, trying to do it myself. And thanks, Dr. Q. That's what my students used to call me, Dr. Q. Overall, it's been great quality. Thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and impressions. You're welcome. I think I'm going to do a few more of these. By the way, look at other videos on this channel, because what I did was to try to create some of the main themes that Gene used for his parables and do videos about them, short videos with clips from the movie, so you could see how it works. It's on this channel. It's the You'll Shoot Your Eye Out, the book. You'll Shoot Your Eye Out, the book. I didn't use A Christmas Story in it because that would be a potential liability. So it's You'll Shoot Your Eye Out. And thanks for being appreciative. Thanks for your kind comments. I appreciate it. It's been really a blessing for me to have known Gene and learned so much from him, and it helped my students a lot to I became such a better teacher. In fact, I even wrote a book about teaching, which has a section on using story in teaching based on his influence on me. So thanks, everybody, very, very much for hanging in there with me. I wish you all the best. Please subscribe to the channel too. You'll Shoot Your Eye Out channel. And you've got the email address there, but it's also on the channel if you want to send me a personal note about anything that you didn't necessarily want to bring up tonight. So best, as Gene would say in ham radio lingo, 73, which means best regards.